Alright, so this is the room tour, I guess you can say. Right here first is my gaming PC area, along with some of the more last and current gen stuff. Down here is my Xbox One, my Xbox 360, and my OG Xbox. The OG Xbox is hooked to my CRT, though, which I'll get to in a moment. Plus, there's a surround sound system there, a couple controllers. Of course, here is my triple monitor setup. Now I'm going to be getting brackets to turn these 90 degrees so that they're vertical monitors on the side and just have the center monitor there for its gaming purposes. As a 1080p Sanyo TV, actually. The Xbox One's actually my pass-through. The PC actually goes through that just because I only have one HDMI plug on this thing at the moment. And I use an HDMI 2 component adapter, and it doesn't play nice with any of my hardware for some reason when it comes to that, at least on this TV. Q8400 Core 2 Quad, 660 Ti, and 8 gigs of RAM. It plays something like Far Cry 5 at 1080p normal, around 40ish FPS. But yeah, so that's my modern area, and of course I have my headphones hung up there for when I want to just play without the surround sound system on. The TV outputs its audio via an optical to analog converter to my surround sound there, and plus there's an alternate plug for MP3 player down there, although I've got to replace the cable, starting to get a little bit ragged. And just to show off a little bit of stuff on the wall, some of my gaming stuff, a couple autographs. Got Mr. Trinier's autograph there this spring, and Marie-Claude Bourbonnais or whatever, not very good. And Ryan King got me this when he was at Portland Retro Game Expo a couple years ago. And my bottle of Klingon Warren autographed by my friend John Hertzler. And I'm actually friends with him. We keep in touch quite a bit. And yeah, I made friends with him a few years ago. It's pretty good when you get the head of the Klingon Empire actually autograph your booze, Klingon hooch. But yeah, here's my, ooh, it went to dark mode. Here's my CRT. This is a Samsung TXP 2734. This is one of the last sets that Samsung made before going to digital sets. It's 480i, has composite, S-video, and RF. Has S-video on the side as well. I have my two Raspberry Pis hooked up. We'll move this nice little Mega Drive sign that I have made here. There's a composite selector here. This is for my two Pis and my VCR, which I'll get to it as well in a moment. And my component video selector. Right now I've only got my OG Xbox, and the that label is wrong, by the way. It's the OG Xbox and my PSP are the only things that are hooked to that at the moment. I have a PSP component video cable there. But yeah, it's pretty good. I run the Pi here. This vertical looking little model is a David's T box that I just throw all the gear in, as you saw in the other video. I just have that with a new label now. You see here. I made that in GIMP, poor man's Photoshop. Yeah, I just play that on the TV here. The games run in 240p with a nearest vertical integer shader. And the vehicles, man, for a dead-end road, we got a lot of traffic here. The menus run 480i. Now, my other Pi that's here, I've got it put in this after I have started work on the actual Sega Genesis casing that it's going to ultimately go into after prototyping the other one. That's for like PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 and other stuff that needs a bit more punch. It's a Pi 2, and I use a PlayStation style controller. This is the Nyko Airflex EX. I got this for like $1 at a local thrift store, and it works amazingly. And the little switch lets you run a fan that's in the controller to let you have your hands a little bit more ventilated. I just use Super Nintendo style controllers for the or Super Famicom style controllers with the Pi 1. As well, my S-Video enhanced. S-Video enhanced. It has an S-Video cable. My Nintendo 64. The expansion pack actually doesn't work. The expanded memory, so I just have the jumper pack in it at the moment. Though it's not really needed for the games that I have. my VCR, as well as my HP DV6000 series. This is the DV6432, I think. It's got 4 gigs of DDR2, GMA 950 Intel GPU, and it's a dual core running Windows 7 32-bit, and it has always hooked to it my Game Bridge. I need to mount this or something. I got a working remote for it somewhere. But the TV has a monitor output, which is composite video and stereo audio, and I just record it via that. So any of my gameplay that you see in the videos is just recorded off of this. As well, this this laptop has an S-video output over on the side here above the Ethernet, and I can just use this as a separate monitor some evenings when I'm playing a game and I want to watch something a bit more old school and just stream it from the laptop. I can use this TV here if I want to. Besides that, my PSP and Sega Genesis and Nintendo 64 and Game Boy collection, along with some Atari and a couple of TRS-80 games there. Besides that, just, some collectibles. And a sleeping kitty. Look at that. Look at that. And besides all this, my workstation here, which is something that's just built from parts that I got my hands on. Triple core Athlon 2X3 460, 8 gigs of DDR3, a GeForce 645 GTX 1 gigabyte video card, which is basically making this like a workstation, along with a 500 gigabyte hard drive I pulled from a laptop, and I'm running Ubuntu Studio. So yeah, I do a lot of my media production here, and this is usually, in that little TV there is usually where I put my bendy tripod on. I point the lights at me and use the microphone there, and I usually just film myself facing this all right here. So yeah, this is basically my setup right now. I am not parting with CRT for the life of me, and I'm pretty good at recapping things, so if I ever have any capacitor issues, I'll be doing that. But onwards to the next part of the video. Hi, so this is part 2 of my video. You just saw my room tour. You might hear my dog clacking around. She hears me talking now. She's going to come out of nowhere. Hi, kid. So, yeah, you saw my room tour. So I want to touch on something that Xander Scully and a couple other people talked about, and that's emulation. And experiences with emulation growing up. First experience, I was in high school. I was about 17 or 18, and the local library just had their computers well, not upgraded. They finally got computers, I should say. They never had computers for the longest time until that point, and they got 2 brand new Pentium 75s running Windows 95, and they had a paid worker there. I used to do some volunteering along with it because it was a volunteer library. It's not a public library. In my province, we have the public library system, but smaller communities just maintain their own volunteer, and they might have funding to pay an employee here and there. But so I saw the guy playing Super Mario Brothers, kind of like Xander did, except it was Mario 2, and I said, "How you doing that?" And he says, "It's emulation. It's something I discovered in university." This guy just came back from his first year of university and was working an intern job or something like that. Anyway, so he showed me it. It was Nesticle. And then later on, researching online, there were other emulators too. There was Genesis for the Sega Genesis, and they had gotten another computer afterwards, which was actually more peppier. It was the newer Pentium 200 MMX model or something, and so ZNES or something like that was something I discovered, so I could play Super Nintendo games. So I started playing games like that, like Beavis and Butthead, and other games for that. And then I went away to my university. In my second year, actually, after my first summer job, I saved up enough money, and I got myself a laptop. It was secondhand. It was a 486 DX2/66, had a LCD black and white screen, no sound card, 4 megs of RAM, and I managed to put Windows 95 on it. So that was all fine and dandy, and I had Genesis, and I had Nesticle, and there was a DOS Game Boy emulator on there. And the cool thing was that it could actually use your PC speaker for sound. So, black and white games are black and white games, and I actually had some low-grade sound. I think it was like AM radio quality, like 12,500
kilohertz or something like that. Like it was like a quarter of the quality of FM, which is like 4,400 or 44,000 kilohertz or something. And then I finished with university. I moved back home. My folks at that point had retired our old 486 that we had. We had a DX4/100, and they decided to get something a bit more modern. So they got bought one from a local store back when you could just buy a clone from a company. And they bought a Celeron with I think it was like 32 megs of RAM, 8 megs on board, VRAM, Windows Millennium Edition, which I asked the guy at the store, could you put Windows 98 in there? And he tried to give me the sign saying that Windows 98 wouldn't work on this computer, which that was utter garbage. But I had discovered a couple things. My brother had sent home some burned PlayStation games. This is around the early 2000s. He had sent home some doubles. He had a burned PlayStation. He was like, well, if you can figure out how to get these working, you might have a PlayStation. I didn't. He didn't understand that you needed a mod chip. He bought his pre-modded. But I discovered Bleem, and so I'd installed Bleem. I was on dial-up too, so it kind of sucked having to download BIOS files. And it wasn't even fast dial-up. We had a 56K modem, and we weren't breaking 21K because the nearest dial-up point was over 30 kilometers away. So, but I managed to download the emulator and the BIOSes. I used to do all my downloading at night, so. And then I also discovered FGBA or something to that point. It was a Game Boy Advance emulator, and so I was downloading and playing Game Boy Advance games. And the best part was that I got my hands on a GamePort controller. I forget what it was. It was one of those cheap PlayStation-style ones. It didn't have the thumbsticks. The face buttons were the same as the shoulder buttons, so you really only had 4 buttons in your D-pad. But that was perfect for like some PlayStation games and for Game Boy Advance games. The only things were that I didn't have a start and select. I just used the space bar and the select key space bar was my start button and shift was my select. But I customized the buttons so that B and A and 2 shoulder buttons were my buttons, and I used to play like Mario Kart Advance or Super Circuit, whatever locality you're in. Then I moved from home. I was out on my own. Had a computer here and there for emulation. But about 10 years after I'd left home, about 5 years, I was out on my own. I was working in a mining town, and I got myself a Nintendo Wii. And I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty decent. I picked up a secondhand PSP, which I still have, my 2000, when I had moved back home after about a year. The big recession in 2008 hit, and literally half of the town I was in lost their jobs. So I had moved back with my parents, went on employment insurance, Pogie, for Canadian viewers. I discovered I could hack my Wii with, at the point it was the Twilight hack. It was before Banner Bomb and that, so and nobody in my town rented games. People gave that up years ago because people would just steal the games, not return them, use a false name. So I had to go to the next town, which we did every other day. It was about an hour's drive away, but I rented the game. At the time, my mother was working in that town, so she could just return the next day and drop it in the return box. So I borrowed the game, downloaded the hack files, and hacked my Wii, and so I had the homebrew channel, and so I was playing games on that, and I had the classic controller, so I could do that, and plus I had scored a PSP off someone who was selling it for like $50, and I discovered that you could hack it as well, compact flash, custom firmware. It was back in the days of Dark Alex, if anybody's familiar with PSPs. It wasn't even 5.33, it was around version 3-ish or so. And I was like, oh man, am I going to ruin this? Because it said there's a danger you could break your PSP if it's not the right one. But I looked and I verified everything. I took it apart and made sure I had the right chipsets and that, and I hacked it and it worked. So I was like, this is awesome. And so I was playing like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Game Boy Advance and everything like with my PSP. I was buying the games too because people were selling them for cheap. A lot of people bought the PSP and didn't realize you couldn't do much with them, but then I was buying the TV out cables, and my Wii besides could play a lot of games. And I had a Windows 7 PC at that point. It only had like a gig of RAM, onboard video, and and a Pentium D, but I was able to do a lot of emulation with it. And then, as time went on, I would upgrade it a bit, and I actually cut up an OG Xbox Madcax controller that I had for USB. I discovered you could do that, and actually, there's a video on my channel about it. Thanks for a lot of the views, guys, by the way. It broke 6 figures. So I was emulating like that for years. Then I discovered you could hack Xboxes, and I had an Xbox laying around, and I didn't have a way at first of putting stuff on, and then I discovered like I could put a USB port in the controller. I show you how to do that on Instructables as well, because I saw there was a guy had a video where not a video, it was a tutorial, and he shows how you can take a memory card for the OG Xbox, rip it out, and put a USB port in. And I was like, well, I don't have one of those, and I don't use the memory card ports. How about I just rip the card port out and put a USB port right in there? And so that's what I did, and I still got a couple that are like it. And so that's how I was able to hack mine. And I can't remember where I got the game for hacking it. I think I already had it. Somebody had just given it to me when they were clearing it, because the Xbox I got from there too, I didn't have a controller. I actually scored a controller secondhand off of someone. And I'd fixed the DVD drive. The DVD drive was dead, and it could turn on, but they wouldn't read games. That's why they gave it to me. And so I had to go through all the steps of, like, I had to get a power cord for it. I had to get an AV cord for it. So it took me a little while, and I found another one that was fried, and I just swapped over the DVD drives. And I hacked it, and I did the hack where you replace the dashboard with XBMC. And then I just FTP'd over a bunch of stuff, and I started emulating on that, and I was blown away by it. Now, fast forward a few years later, I still have a hacked Xbox, a soft-mounted Xbox. I should say hacked is just too blasé, I guess. I have 2 Raspberry Pis. The Raspberry Pi I learned about in 2012, 2013, and finally in early 2014 I got one. I'd gotten RetroPie back in the early days. This was like before, I think, even version 2. Where you had to go through a lot of different steps to get controllers working in Emulation Station, and then in RetroArch. Kodi wasn't a thing. I got Kodi working when somebody on Reddit had said you just get the ARM version of Kodi. PlayStation worked better back in the day on a Pi 1 versus now. It's really blotchy that, but when I had my Pi 1 back in the day, I found like I only got a little bit of slowdown. But it was great. I had my big Toshiba, and I used to just hook it into that, and I was playing games on that, and I had it hooked my flat panel Samsung. They were playing them in HD. And a couple years later, I actually got the Pi 2, which I should have waited a little while longer to get, because I could have had a Pi 3 then. Because when I got mine, lo and behold, the Pi 3 came out just a couple months later. And when I got my Pi 1, actually a few months later, the Pi 2 had come out as well. But I'm probably going to get a Pi 3B Plus at some point soon. Although now there's RetroPie X86, and I actually have an old Lenovo laptop. It was being pretty slow. It was like 6 years old. It's basically Lenovo took their netbooks and put it into a full-size laptop profile. The same hardware, it's just in a larger profile, so it's kind of underpowered. So I wipe Windows from it, put Linux on there, and it's like, hey, well, this is an Ubuntu variant, Elementary OS, so I'll put RetroPie on here, and it works pretty decently. But if you got like an older computer laying around, like ETA Prime shows you can emulate on that, and just put that on there, or Bacotera Linux, which is a variant of Recall Box, I think they call it. Mark Verheer over in his channel actually shows you how you can just actually burn the image directly to a hard drive and just have it on a computer, so you can just have it as a Recall Box emulation box, and it just boots right to it. And there's no extra stuff for an operating system like RetroPie and RetroPie x86 is, where they're built upon Ubuntu or Debian variants. But it's pretty great. Now, my Pi 1, as I show in my video, I'm doing 240p on that, and it's got shaders on there called nearest vertical integer shader, so it doesn't look like that flickery mess like when you emulate on some stuff and you use it on a 480i TV. It kind of flickers. It's actually 240p. My Pi 2 goes back and forth between this TV and the one in the living room, the flat panel there, so I don't bother with any shaders. But But yeah, I emulate on that, and I have my PSP, which I emulate on a fair bit. I actually just discovered how well this TV performs with the PSP hooked to it, and so I emulate on there. As for how I feel about emulation, obviously I endorse it. It's great. You're not going bankrupt trying to get a lot of different games. Like, I see some people in some forums like, oh, well, Super Nintendo only costs $20 and you can usually get a couple games with it. Yeah, if you're in the middle of an area which, you know, for 100 miles you've got over 1 million people, sure, if you're in the middle of like Texas or California or somewhere like that. But when you're somewhere like me, I'm in a city of 25,000 people, and the metro area is only about 2,000 more, and when you go 50 kilometers outside of here, you're not breaking 60,000. And I was on a road trip 2 weekends ago. I drove about 3 hours away to a place called Gander Bay, and on the way back I drove through a couple spots. One spot I drove through was Grand Falls, and there's a store that I'm not going to name because of what I'm going to mention next. Is they were selling a Sega Genesis Model 2 loose controller and the hookups, $120. That's the going price about here for something like that. You might luck out here and there and get to a garage sale and something's cheap. I remember back in the early 2000s, early mid 2000s, I was at a garage sale. I managed to get a Atari 2600, a 4-switch VCS. Had 2 joysticks, had the paddle rotary controllers still in the box. They were still stiff. They weren't even broken in. They were never used. And over a dozen games, I paid $4. $4 for the works. Somebody on the local game trade here, but they're from out of town, but not that far out of town, they wanted $350 for a 4-switch. 2 joysticks. The joysticks had the rubber totally gone. You just had the white plastic sticks. And a dozen games. They wanted $350 for the lot. Now that is, admittedly, that is overpriced, but that's about the going market here. There are stores here that are wanting well above $100 for an NES. Now, by contrast, there's the NES and SNES Classics, or Minis, and the going price for them at the local Walmart is about $80, $90, $200. I haven't checked lately, and the At Games Genesis HD model, the one that actually uses cartridges and has inbuilt games, that's going for $99.99. So it's just as cheap to get something like that versus the newer hardware. And I've seen some people, like when I was in a thread there on Facebook before, and we were talking about the Analog NT, and some people mentioned the Pi, and somebody who's going to remain nameless. He deleted his comments immediately afterwards, but was going to try to come in and start trolling about it because he has thousands of games and I'd say about 100 systems. But he lives in an area where he can drive maybe an hour at the most, go to swap meets, go to garage sales, go to estate sales, etc., and get these items for a lot cheaper. We don't always have the luxury. Am I dumping on original systems? Hell no. I definitely don't see a problem with something like the Analog NT, and I said it in the thread. Analog NT is for if you're like a vinyl collector and you want a nice high-end deck to play your music on. Emulation is more like you want to hear the music, but you've got an iPhone and you don't mind going and downloading the music to your phone. And you just want to play it that way digitally. And that's fine. And the original systems and the games is like if you still have that hi-fi deck, you keep maintain, replace the needles, etc., and the bands, and you play your well-maintained collection on that. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just right now as it goes, collecting is a racket. I think right now the way it goes, the current trend is that 64 and PS1 are the kind of things that are more in and getting towards PS2 and Dreamcast, etc. Atari is long done with. It's to the point where it's back to being saturated. Nintendo, same thing. The prices are starting to go a bit lower. I remember at one point you'd pay $50,000 for something like Earthbound, and that was a fairly common game, but because people drove up demand for it, it drove up the price. Little Samson, yeah, it's a low print run game, so that's still fetching a decent price, but Little Samson is, probably not going to so much depreciate in price as, Earthbound. I've seen some copies go for $100 versus going for $50,000 before, because yeah, it was a high-priced game, but you could throw a rock on eBay and hit 15 of them. So that's the thing. Like, there was an artificial demand for some of these games driven up. Genesis games are still fairly cheap to collect for because not as many people want it. It's common enough. What you're going to have a problem with is something like TurboGrafx versus PC Engine. PC Engine is a bit more common, but you got to get it sent from Japan, and the price has gone up a bit, and import fees and all that. Sega CD kind of depends if it's common or not. There are some games that go for drug money, as my Australian friends put it on their podcast. But that's the good thing about the Pi. I don't have to bother paying those prices. I just throw the image on my Pi and I play it. I'm going to be playing through Snatcher and putting some highlights on Instagram and on YouTube, and probably going to try out a few Sega CD games and really try out some gems that I never got to play. ColecoVision's another system that I never got to try out growing up. I'd see it advertised in comic books, etc. And I heard of like the odd person in my town had it, but I didn't. We had a Coleco Gemini is what we had, and a Commodore VIC-20, although it died due to the defective power supply problem that a lot of them had. Old Jack never certainly tried to get a hold of users and get their collection replaced. But yeah, Commodore 64, same thing. We never had a 64. A friend of ours growing up, my oldest brother's friend, I think came by once or twice with his, and they played it at the house when they had sleepovers when they were younger. But we never actually had a 64 in the house, although we had a Tandy 1000 RL, which is another good thing. I can emulate games like that with DOSBox either on my computer, or I'm probably going to set up the Pi to be able to emulate some games like that, because there were some fun games that I never got to try out until lately. Like Zeliard was one. It's crazy. Sierra used to import all these Japanese games, localize them, and they were amazing. But yeah, that's the thing. Emulation is great if that's your lot and you can't afford a lot, or you want to discover a system that you never grew up around because of either circumstance or even your location. MSX I'm starting to really get into now as well. We didn't have MSX here in North America. We did have an Atari ST. My cousin had one when I was a teenager, and I got to try that out. And it was a fairly fun system. And he had an Atari Jaguar. He even had a cat box, which it was this breakout box that you could hook into the back of the Jaguar's card edge connector, and you could output it to RGB. And he had the ST monitor hooked up to it at one point. He was playing it on that, and it was just crazy the quality of it. He had a Coleco Atom that he never ever hooked up, but I got to try TurboGrafx, Turbo CD, and stuff like that because he had that. He had more obscure systems, which was great, but that's the thing too. As I said, there were games that we didn't have here in North America unless you imported them, and you had a TurboGrafx and a Turbo CD like Rondo of Blood. You would try out more localized versions like I showed on the channel here. Castlevania 3, the Japanese version, uses that VRC7 chip, I think. I could be wrong, but the sound is amazing on it. Same thing with Lagrange Point or whatever. I got a localized version of it here, a fan localized version, and the sound is crazy on it. It's on par with the Sega Genesis. It adds apparently 6 channels of FM audio, FM synthesis audio, which the stock Famicom couldn't do, but the stock Famicom had pass-through capabilities for these chips, and so you get to try out things like that. Other systems, it's just crazy. Like 7800, never really had it around me, and now I'm trying out some of the games there, which are decent. Although the fault of the system was the sound chip on board was the same as the 2600. And fan hacks. Berserk. I like sitting down playing the voice synthesis Berserk game. Berserk on the 2600 is a solid game. It holds up today. Graphically, it's simplistic. It's a couple of colors on a screen, a couple of lines, and then what happens is in between each screen in this fan hack is that there's a oscillation of the sound volume, and it requires the whole of the CPU. So there's no sound synthesis in gameplay, but between screens you actually hear the fight like a man, chicken, blah blah blah. And so in between screens you get the same voice synthesis as was in the arcade. And there's a 2600 enhanced Donkey Kong that somebody made, and it's great. It honestly is. But yeah, it really pushes the hardware, and you get to try that stuff out. Now, there's some stuff that costs a couple dollars, like there's a refined Pac-Man version. Mark Vahir, again, reference him. I love his channel. It's great stuff that Mark shows off. It's really up my alley. And he has a modern homebrew version of Pac-Man for the 2600. And you can get it on Atari Age for fairly cheap. I think you can just buy the ROM and download it, which I'm probably going to turn around and do. And it looks a lot of fun. It's a lot better than the actual Atari release. Although, that was circumstance, if you look into it, that the guy was only given so much time and it was just him working on it. But, you know, Ms. Pac-Man was a much better release on that system. I can sit here and talk about emulation all day, and a lot of my friends do emulate and, you know, make no bones about it. I enjoyed my Wii. It was great for emulation, but then I discovered my Xbox soft modded could do more, play more Nintendo 64, and I'm gonna try some PlayStation on there. I gotta get the BIOS files put over, and I got a stack of games. I got Final Fantasy VIII, and I got Siphon Filter. Which one of them is it? There's more of the Siphon Filters, and Final Fantasy IX, and Legend of Dragoon. Is it? Yeah. But yeah, don't knock emulation. And I mean, that's the thing. If you use Xbox Live Arcade, older hits, that's emulation. You use the Virtual Channel, that's emulation. And then Super Nintendo and Nintendo Classics, and the At Games HD system, that's emulation. That's an Android-based system right there. That's built on Android. So is the Switch, but the Switch doesn't do so much emulation, although I think it's going to be pretty soon more slanted towards emulation. 3DS has a lot of emulation on there. There are handhelds built around actual emulation. Canoe made a bunch, GP Wiz, the GP Win series. There's a big business in emulation. Now, the Retron 5 is another one. Dumps the ROMs off of the cartridge onto an Android-based system. Just there's so many to mention now. The only thing that bothers me now is every other Tom, Dick, and Harry now thinks that they can make a Pi box, sell it as a system, and think they can make a Mint. And they discover how hairy it actually is. There was one that was built around an Orange Pi that could apparently boot original discs. And they discovered the ins and outs, I think, of running BIOSes, etc. And they just discovered that you couldn't get around that kind of stuff. Then there was the Neo Geo X that came out, that little portable. And it turned out that they were using, I think it was code from Final Burn Alpha, and that's a non-commercial. That's a non-commercial emulator. Same thing with the Retron 5 when that came out. Now they detailed that they were using parts of code from SNES 9X, etc. I thought that was how you got around the GPL. Unfortunately, no, you could not use any of that code because that code was licensed for non-commercial use, and they were using it commercially because they were including it in a system that was sold commercially. Now the Retrons, the Retro Pis and stuff like that get around it because they don't include any of the BIOSes, they don't charge for the product, and they explicitly say when you go into the RetroPie setup to configure some things, add emulators, etc., it says if you paid money for this, get your money back because this is not allowed to be charged for. Same, it's one thing to pay a buddy to set it up for you. You give him a case of beer, etc., etc. It's fine, or her. But when you got a guy in your local Facebook saying, "Oh yeah, I charge $200 for all these, load up with ROMs, etc." Yeah, don't advertise that stuff, dude. Don't even. It's just as easy to do it on your own. I see some people's like, "Oh, I can't figure it out for the life of me." It's because you don't want to learn. It's stupidly simple to do these. There's even something in RetroPie called RetroPie Manager that you can install now, and you just have a web browser as long as your Pi is connected to your network. Use a web browser. Go to your Pi's IP on port 8000, and you just browse through. You find the folder, drag and drop, or Samba. Or if you got a Linux machine like me, you just pop the card in, you find the folder, you drag and drop it. It's stupidly simple. But I'm starting to rant and ramble now, so I gotta cut it off here. But just to do some tidy up business here, and they gave me permission to do this. I've been speaking with Chargeback Forward, and I'm gonna be doing some stuff on Sega CD like Snatcher. I have not played through Snatcher before in my life. I played the first few minutes, and there's always something coming up where I've never got to sit down and enjoy it. And I'm setting aside a day today, not today, but a day soon, and I'm going to sit down and from start to finish, I'm going to play Snatcher, get some of my reactions as I'm playing it, and I'm going to put some stuff of it up on Instagram and a video up on YouTube as well. I've been in talks with Terrence mostly, actually, and the next video he said I was allowed to tease something else, and I'm going to tease that then. So yeah, keep watching here. Videos are starting to get more consistent. I gotta get back my Let's Plays, but I want to get that out of the way first. Let's Plays are Let's Plays. They're fun and dandy. Master of Darkness I'm going to finish at some point. But, and that's the thing too with Emulation, you're spoiled for choice. But Snatcher, it sounds so nice, it plays so nice, and the story is fairly enticing, so I'm definitely going to be playing it. And that roll in audio, like, what are you guys doing? Now I got to start collecting video game vinyl. Damn it. But anyway, new videos coming out soon. This one's going up today. Take it easy, y'all. See ya.